So you wouldn't start with the breath then, you would start with the hips. Have I got that right? Or something else?
Yes, absolutely. In most cases, I would start with the hips. There's occasional differences. Some people have extremely expansive hypertrophic
Mm,
diaphragms, singers, certain instrument players, different things like that. But most people have a very tight, restricted diaphragm that hasn't quite learned how to be pulled upon in quite some
mm,
time. So the first thing we need to do is establish anchors before we establish elastic pull and potential, which comes
mm,
next very rapidly within a matter of a week or two. You have to first get the sensation of a base at the pelvis. We have anchoring exercises that do that. Anchored extensions, anchored hinges, and all these different anchoring processes that are put into different poses to stabilize what's called the pubic symphysis, where the two halves of the pelvic hemispheres meet. And then from those two halves, you have these big, strong thigh muscles, the adductor muscles, the groin muscles that are like guide wires that insert at either side of that center of gravity, the pubic symphysis, between those two pelvic
yeah.
bones. Those are the center of gravity guide wires of the body.
Mm,
When they're moving well, you're in a pretty good position. When the glutes shorten, they turn those quite a bit. And that turn stops that center line from being stable in its pull. It's off. It's off kilter. It's always trying to find center, but it's having a trouble time
mm.
getting there. So we need to center those guide wires. And we do that with a lot of isometric exercises and very specific hip hinge pattern and lift pattern exercises for the pelvis. It's all body
It's
weight.
fascinating. So if somebody came to you and they said, "Look, I've got some dysfunctional breathing. I'm a mouth breather, or I've got a very tight chest, or I feel anxious," your first cause wouldn't necessarily go to the breath. You'd be looking at the body, which I don't think anyone's ever spoke to me that much about. So I find this fascinating because we go straight to breathing
Yeah,
exercises where I come from.
sure,
So
sure. A
yeah.
lot do. And breathing controls a
Mm,
ton. Breathing is very powerful. It controls a ton, but the frame that you breathe in can also very significantly dictate the breath you breathe. So I work with the
mm,
scaffolding around the lungs. I work with the rib cage, the serratus musculature, the intracostals, the diaphragm, the latissimus muscles, the sternocleidomastoid muscles. These are pulleys that pull apart the rib
mm,
cage. But those pulleys need an anchor line from which to pull. If the rib cage is unstable, those muscles dominate and they become problematic and we become shallow breathers because they don't have anything stabilizing at the pelvis.
mm,
So we need the two ends of that finger trap,
mm,
the lift and the anchor at the bottom. So what I would do if you said, all right, Eric, I need to fix my breathing pattern, I would put you first in two poses, a supine decompression on your back and a prone decompression on your stomach. They're very similar poses done within two gravitational positions, one lifting the skull and learning how to breathe, one pressing and expanding the rib cage, zipping up the pelvis in both, learning how to breathe. So the position immediately dictates the breath and how it goes into your system. Once I put you, I'm going to stand up doing the position, but imagine I'm laying on my back. My toes are touching, my knees are touching, I'm standing tall, my hips are behind me a little bit. I'm not pushing them forward. I'm standing up, lifting my skull, and just holding my lats as wide and broad as I can and my chest as high as I can while my knees are touching with my heels apart. That anchors the pelvis immediately. That position, you'll shake, you'll be into this very tight centering exercise immediately. That changes how your rib cage expands the moment the tension is held.
mm.
So it's not like, okay, teach me how to do this, teach me how to breathe. It's anchor the pelvis and first and foremost, take 20 breaths with that pelvic line anchored and feel where your rib cage is expanding. Breathe into those
Yeah.
areas. That's what your rib cage wants to do when the pelvis is not centered and anchored. It wants to breathe here, but it can't quite get there. So that's kind of the first lesson.
Wow. And In layman's terms, what's going on with the pelvis and the rib cage? Like, are they misaligned and that's causing
Tug
the
of war.
problem? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a
Tug of
tug of
war.
war. They're meant to be in concert in a collaborative tug of war. The pelvis sort of pulls away from the rib cage. The rib cage, like a hot air balloon, sort of pulls away gently from the pelvis. But the most important thing is it's not a lift. It's an expansion, with the most important recipient of the expansion being posterior, the back of the rib cage. So the tether is the pelvis. The hot air balloon is filling with the breath, but we don't want it to lift off the ground, so that tether is tight. The pelvis is holding while the balloon tries to lift, and that attempted lift tensions everything in between.
Wow.
Does that help you understand?
I really like the hot air balloon analogy. That's helped my brain. Where does fascia kick into all this? How does that play a role in all these movements and breathing?
So the grand theory of fascia, as I understand it, is that tensegrity is the goal. Tensegrity is an outward expansive force instead of an inward compressive force. The idea being that an outward expanse strengthens seams more than an inward compression against those seams. Pulling creates better cohesion. Does that make sense? So in the torso, we have a expansive system that is learning to stay compressed. Right. So what we teach in foundation training, decompression breathing, is a re-education towards expansion for the whole axial skeleton. And that expansion teaches the rest of the body how to align. Without the expansion, it's almost impossible to find reasonable alignment.
Hey, thank you so much for sticking all the way through to the end of that podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I just have a quick question for you. Would you do us a favor and leave us a comment down below with one thing that you learned from the podcast, or one thing that you want to take away and implement into your own life? And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our Breathwork in a Blink. It's our 5-minute easy read newsletter. It comes out every single Friday. And in that, I'm sharing things like my favorite breathing exercise of the week, a study that I've been reading on breathing. We've got a wild card section. We've got all these different bits, and it's been designed so you can read it and scan through it in less than 5 minutes and pick out something you'd like to go deeper on. So the link is down below. It's completely free. You can unsubscribe anytime and join the nearly 10,000 other people that have subscribed to this wonderful email newsletter. Link is down below, and I look forward to serving you each and every Friday.